Thank you,
Great.
Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. And as you can see, I've brought in the heavy hitters for this very important topic. So just for people to understand the process that we'll be taking in unpacking this concept of safety culture today, what we've done is we've collected questions from a bunch of customers and participants over the last 12 months or so, and we've aimed to answer those throughout this webinar to create more clarity and demystify this idea of safety culture a little bit. There will be other questions, no doubt, that come to mind. So I encourage you to pop those questions into the chat and we will get to those, as many of those as we can towards the end of the webinar. So we're going to tackle safety culture. We've already had our introductions done and we've heard the mission of Sentis, which is to change the lives of organizations, individuals and organizations for the better every day. We do that through the application of psychology and neuroscience to help build leadership capability, to create greater team engagement, alignment and safety. But also a big part of what Amy does is unpack what's happening within organizations and what are the drivers that are either propelling an organization forward or potentially stopping them from achieving both their organizational and strategic outcomes. So to help you process today and as a takeaway, we've also have an attachment to this webinar. It is an attachment which has an outline of some of the key concepts we're going to talk about today, including our maturity model, our take on the safety culture model, and some opportunities here for you to take some notes and put some of your learnings into action. So I encourage you to download that resource. It's a really useful one, and take some notes and have a think about how this applies to your business. So we're going to tackle this idea of safety culture with the most commonly answered question: what is safety culture? So Amy, to launch straight into it, what's your take on safety culture?
Yeah, thanks, Ant, and hi to everyone who's joining us live and listening on a recording. I think safety culture is a really interesting concept because, to begin with, it's really nice to start just with the word safety and ask, what does safety mean to you? What does safety mean to your organization? So I'd ask everyone to take a moment to just consider how they would begin with answering that question. And then we know that everyone will have a slightly different answer about what safety means to them. It could be around having no incidences or no injuries. It could be around getting people home safely, but it's really going to depend on your role, your experience, your workplace. And the challenge isn't to, the challenge with understanding safety is that it's really easy to see when something goes wrong, but it's more difficult to see when something is going right. You know, when everything's working well, it's easy to kind of forget about it. And so that's where we can start to look at safety culture, and we can start to unpack this idea of a shared attitude, belief, values about safety. So it's essentially the way things are done around here. So this gives us the opportunity to begin to unpack and understand why things may be working well, where things perhaps aren't working so well, and what are the underlying attitudes and norms that are driving that. The key part here is that idea of it being shared. So it's something that is across the majority of people, they have that shared sense of the way things are done. And we know that groups are very powerful at influencing behavior, particularly at work. And so that influence process is something that continues to maintain and create safety culture over time.
Great.
Yeah.
Look, it's an interesting thing that you mentioned there, Amy, around the focus of safety typically being on what's not working as opposed to what is working. I'm going to give you a follow-up question that we typically get when it comes to safety culture. And that is, why does safety culture differ from organizational culture? Why should we focus on safety culture as opposed to just focusing on organizational culture?
Yeah, lovely. So organizational culture is the broader shared attitudes, beliefs, and values about the way things are done within a workplace. And so safety culture is a subcomponent of that. And the interesting part about understanding culture is that it's quite a nebulous concept. So it's quite difficult to define. And when we look at something as broad as organizational culture, that's where we can start to have more difficulty with really beginning to unpack it. And what's up here on the slides at the moment is our safety culture model. And that's where we start to begin by focusing in on a specific component of organizational culture, safety culture. We can target in and begin to unpack it, which means we get an opportunity to measure it. And if we can measure it properly, then we can start to make change. We all know that improving safety in the workplace has some really important tangible benefits. And because we can see those benefits, it's easy to kind of choose this as a place to begin. The thing that I love about choosing safety culture as an initial starting point is that by getting an opportunity to practice and improve our communication, our leadership, our processes within safety, we actually see that flow across into the broader organizational culture. So by improving your communication with your team around safety issues, you'll notice that those communication skills are transferable to improving the broader communication that you're having within your team. And so an opportunity to improve that not only gives you the direct benefits of safety improvement, but you also get the broader benefits of changing that culture as well, or those behaviors, those processes, those attitudes start to transfer across. And I know, Ant, you've seen this yourself. You know, you've seen those improvements of choosing safety culture flowing across into the broader organizational culture.
Look, absolutely. We tend to find that organizations will approach us in one of two broad states. One, they're trying to fix an immediate problem. They've had incidents or there's been pushed down from the board that they need to address safety. There's often an external factor which is driving them to have to go in and jump on and address these safety issues that they've got. And often they're stuck. They don't know where to go next. They've tried a bunch of things when it comes to shifting their safety performance, and often looking at understanding where people's heads are at becomes the last frontier. But we are seeing a real shift in a number of organizations who are in the high risk space who are saying, look, our need and our requirement to focus on safety isn't going anywhere. And in fact, if we focus on safety and safety culture, that can become a broader organizational lever that we can show people tangible care and build trust, because it's often in those high risk organizations where it can be the safety things that are done well or not so well that can actually erode the broader organizational culture. So things like incident investigations, if they're not conducted in a way which is transparent and focused on finding the true outcomes, and if the result is that we always end up on the person being the key focus of those incident investigations, what that does is that has an impact on trust across that organization. And that trust carries across not only in safety, but in other areas of the business as well. So safety gives us, and we've seen this done really well in a number of the businesses that we work with, by focusing on things like leadership or getting the practices right, or building team motivation and focusing on quite a tangible thing like safety, and trying to positively reward and recognize things that are going well. We see that culture starts to permeate across other areas. Psychological safety and trust, is one example where we can start to see some really tangible impacts of focusing on safety.
Absolutely. And I think trust is just so central to all of the safety culture elements that we're talking about today. And you're right, there's the opportunity to build trust or breach trust as we work on each of these things. What's on the slides at the moment is the more detailed breakdown of our safety culture model, where we can see the components at that person level. So skills, teamwork, intelligence, motivation. At the practices level, these are our policies and procedures, our toolbox or pre-start talks, different standards of training and safety processes. Our leadership component sits around the entire model, and the reason it sits around it is that it influences all three of these other components across a broad range of different safety commitments, safety communication, as well as that idea of production pressure as we're getting our work done. And at that environment level, we're looking at our equipment, our tools, our housekeeping, our engineering, and our planning and design. So you can see how by unpacking it in this way, we've built this model by drawing across literature and our own research, our own data collection, and feedback through our clients. So this model provides a broad scope of the variety of safety culture components.
Look, it's an interesting model because it also helps us to unpack common challenges which we have raised with us. Things like, how do you manage different approaches from senior leaders? And you can understand, looking at this model, that leadership has an influence on everything within that model. But if you've got something like a misaligned leadership group, how do you tackle that?
Absolutely. And again, because it sits around and influences everything, it is often a piece that we spend a lot of time working on and a lot of time trying to improve. And I think it's got to start at the top. It's got to flow through the organization, those right messages, that right vision, that right process. And again, it comes back to what you were talking about before with even just the way incidences are investigated, and is it a blame culture, or is it something that's seeking to improve and seeking to learn and seeking to build that trust. So through that flowing from above and getting it right at the top is probably the first step. And then really making the effort to evaluate and assess and continuously improve across all levels of leadership.
Look, it's a great working model. Things like, how do you manage change during, how do you manage safety during periods of change, for example? This gives you a model to think about, well, are our policies keeping up? Are we consulting with people effectively? Are leaders on the same page around that change? Even things as simple as onboarding. How do you onboard people in a way which helps them to adopt the most positive version of your culture when they come on board? This model gives some really good, I guess, tools for leaders to think about in how they deliberately build their culture.
Yeah, absolutely. That onboarding process in particular is really central to the maintenance and the creation of your culture. Whenever we start in a new workplace, you often carry with you your previous workplace's expectations, those attitudes, norms, values that you're used to, those ways of doing things. And so when you start in a new workplace, you get those attitudes, those norms, those values are going to be reinforced by the new colleagues you're with, the new team, the new leadership, and you're going to find that you shift over time to fit that new culture that you're in. So it's really important to think about what is the experience of our new hires, our new apprentices, whoever it is, whatever level they're coming in, what are they seeing? How are they being talked through things? Are they being talked through the policies and procedures as a waste of time, just tick it and get it done, we've got so much else on? Or are they being talked about it in a way of getting people home safely? You know, if you notice anything, we need you to raise it with us. And when they do raise something for the first time, are they being met with that sense of psychological safety around raising that issue, or are they being met with, oh gosh, I don't have time for this?
Mm-hmm.
And so we do need to really think those early interactions for our new hires are going to help cement that culture. Culture is something that's deeply ingrained. It is slow. It's possible to change, but it's slow to change. And so you need to be consistent. It's built through these tiny, regular interactions. And so if you want to try and make some shifts in your culture, you need to be ensuring that those small interactions are consistently moving in the right direction.
Yeah. So a very useful working model. Look, for anyone online which is interested in unpacking this further, you can jump on our website. There's a great resource called Driving a Positive Safety Culture, where we've taken information from all the different organizations that we've worked with over the last few years. We've got a huge set of data there, and you can get some really useful insights into the levers that the more progressive or the more mature safety organizations are pulling to get those outcomes. We might launch into our first poll of the day here, reflecting on that model and reflecting on the focus of your leadership team and your organization. What areas get the most attention in your business when addressing safety? So what areas get the most attention when addressing safety in your business? Do people tend to focus, or the organization tend to focus heavily on the environmental controls, the person, so the people's attitudes, skills, capabilities, practices, so it's your policies, procedures, rules, guidelines, or leadership? So where do you typically find your organization spends most of its time focusing? Be curious to see the outcomes of this particular poll.
Okay, we have about 60% voted just now, just a couple more seconds.
No problem.
All right, I'll just show those results.
Sure. Interesting. So practices way out in front there, and then followed by the person, then the environment, and then the leadership. Have I read that right? Oh no, so person, then leadership, then the environmental controls. Interesting, indeed. What's your take on that, Amy?
Yeah, I think practices absolutely is a piece that we see a lot of time spent on. We do often see the environment, that kind of physical way the work is set up, the way equipment is designed or maintained, usually is also often seen as a key part of addressing safety. So I think that's really interesting here. And when we consider leadership as being that central piece that sits around everything and has an overarching influence, is interesting to see that only about 11% have ticked that box.
Yeah. What this indicates to me is typical of what we see in a lot of organizations, in that safety can go down the compliance angle so often. You know, when something goes wrong, there is an incident, or something's not in place. Well, if we write a new procedure, write a new policy, and put that into place, then we can tick that box and we can move on. And this is one of the challenges when it comes to organizational culture and safety culture, is practices aren't going to necessarily always help to move a culture forward. And in fact, what we tend to often find is, when we come in, is that in fact we've polled so many practices on top of so many policies that no one could possibly remember them, even, and it makes it really quite a disengaging process. It is interesting to see that people came in second there. That's not always a result. So a survey for another time would be to unpack that a little bit more, and to focus on, in what sense is that person component getting focused on? Is it an investment in people, or is it looking at catching people out, perhaps not doing the right thing? So
Yep.
an opportunity.
Or perhaps an investment just in training.
It could be just investment training as well.
Mm.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for participating in that poll. So what we're going to explore a little bit now is, what does good look like when it comes to safety culture maturity? So Amy, we've got our culture maturity on the screen here. We're going to ask people to, in a moment, consider where their organization sits on this maturity curve. But I'd just like to hear from you. How would you explain these different components of maturity when it comes to individuals reflected on their own organization?
Yeah, wonderful. So what we're interested in looking at here is the processes or the steps that might explain various levels of cultural maturity. And so across all those dimensions that were listed previously under person, practices, environment, and leadership, we've got descriptions across each of these 5 levels. And so we can aggregate those together to get an overall cultural maturity. So what we're interested in looking at here is what's going well, what's not going so well, and working on improving to the next stage. So to begin with, we've got our counterproductive culture. So this is where a company isn't spending too much time really considering safety. They may not have any policies or practices in place. It's just about getting the work done. That public compliance is where safety procedures are there, but they're a bit of a burden. They get in the way. They may not be structured as well as they could be. They need to follow them, and we tend to see this as that compliance process. They'll make sure they're doing the right thing if someone's watching them, but if they can get away with pre-filling things or getting things done ahead of time, or skipping over certain steps when no one's watching, then they will in this sort of public compliance category. The next step up is private compliance. So this is where they are following, the individuals following the safety rules and procedures, and they're doing it because they can see the value perhaps for themselves. So they've moved from doing it because they have to doing it because they can see that value, that it matters to them in the way that they work. Our next step up is where we move from that individual compliance to team level compliance. So this is where we're doing it not just because we have to, as we did back in public compliance, but because we care about our team, because we want to look out for each other, see them get home safely. And then our final step at that citizenship level is broadly across the company. It's everyone's job. It's a shared responsibility to be safe, to improve things, to learn from incidences, and to always be seeking that continuous improvement because it's seen to be something that's valuable. So that mateship and citizenship is based across that organizational citizenship behavior literature, and includes that team level as well as collective level, taking that extra effort, that extra time to do things right. And so what we would always encourage is taking this sort of one step at a time, not trying to jump all the way to the end, and really making an assessment of where do you think you sit now on average, acknowledging that when we break things down into the dimensions, you may find that there are certain things you're doing that would sit in that mateship category, and there are other components of your business that may sit more in public compliance. So as Anthony mentioned, we've got a poll coming up next to consider overall, where would you place yourself on this model?
Great. So what I might encourage people to do is reflect in this next poll, where do they feel their organisation might sit in regards to this level of maturity? Is it a counterproductive, public compliance, private compliance, mateship, or citizenship? Just while people are responding to that, I had a really good question / comment come through from Sanjeev. So he said senior leaders are more focused on the financial side of business or organization in comparison to safety. It does get difficult at times to mold them to think safety before anything else, as it can have a far-reaching effect. How do we address this situation? It's a very common challenge, Sanjeev, and what that is really indicative of is that safety in that organization with those leaders is actually viewed as something separate to the organizational strategy. So they're not actually necessarily linking safety performance to ability to achieve the outcomes that they're looking for. As a result, it's bolted on or clipped onto the side. So part of the challenge often in these organizations, and this often starts at the board, is really exploring and educating senior leaders, board members, and cascading that down. How does safety link to the organizational strategy that we're trying to achieve? Obviously, there's a risk component of that. If we've got a large oil platform and that blows up, then that's probably going to be fairly challenging for our strategy, as we've seen in many instances before. But on the flip side of that, with this maturity model, what we can actually find is that more mature organizations get more out of their people. They get more discretionary effort. They get to use the smarts across the business to go much, much, much faster. So they stop seeing their people as being an army of problems, but rather an army of problem solvers. So we can unpack that a little bit more in just a moment, Amy, but we've got the polls just being closed, I think, Sarah. Great. Okay. So interesting results here. So we've got 3% sitting at counterproductive, 34% sitting at public compliance, then private compliance, mateship, and then citizenship. We've got a few citizenship people in there. So interesting results. Amy, any thoughts on what we've seen come through there?
Yeah, I think it's awesome to see people sitting in that mateship and citizenship categories. I'd love to sit down with each of them and really unpack all those components. At the same time, I'd love to sit down with the people at the other end and unpack what's going on for them too. That's the challenge with these polls, isn't it? I don't get all the info that I'd love to know about each of you. But yeah, look, I think that public compliance, private compliance, the majority of people sitting there is not surprising to me at all. on the next couple of slides, we'll show you where we see the majority of people sitting. But yeah, on average, these guys are probably doing a little bit better than where we see people generally.
Yeah, and the results that we typically see are on the screen, and that tipping point between public compliance and private compliance is often the real challenge, right, Amy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Amy, as you can see on the screen here, we get about 86% of sites sit at that private compliance or below. Yeah, so tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I think, again, this is an aggregate, so it doesn't mean that there aren't components of these businesses that may sit in that private compliance, but on average, across the board, they're sitting more in that public compliance zone or counterproductive zone. So this is, as you can see on the slide here, where we tend to be safe when we're being monitored, we're motivated by avoiding trouble, avoiding getting penalized in any way. And this is where we may see that there are bonuses attached to production, but not necessarily attached to doing things properly. And so we get this impact of underreporting. We see smaller and more frequent sort of incidents and injuries, as well as the potential for more significant and severe incidents and injuries as well.
Yeah. Look, it's an interesting model because you can actually think about this in relation to a range of different scenarios. And I was reflecting on this in relation to my own driving a little while ago. A country kid growing up in North Queensland, perhaps it might have been counterproductive at one stage. It was all about getting from point A to point B as quick as possible. Might have got a couple of speeding tickets, so you tend to start to get a little bit aware. But as I got a bit older and as I started to think a bit more deeply about safety, started to move in the private compliance, and then mateship and citizenship would be in a place where, you know, you're actively encouraging other drivers or, you know, people that are in the car with you, you're going out of your way to be proactive in regards to making sure things are safe. So it is very much a case from about moving on the left-hand side of the screen there from a extrinsic or external bunch of motivators to stay safe to intrinsic. So people are engaged and enlisted in what we're trying to achieve, which has some huge benefits from a leadership and organizational perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a lovely example that I think we can all relate to, having been, you know, learning how to drive when you're 17 or 18 and you're just watching for, oh, is there a speed camera at the end of the road? No, I can go a bit faster, versus making a choice, as you said, is a bit older. No, it's actually not about avoiding getting into trouble. It's about doing the right thing from the beginning. Yeah.
All right. Well, so there's a number of positive benefits of investing in our safety culture. So a couple are outlined here. So we can see, the more we mature up that curve, we tend to see organizations focusing more on lead indicators, but obviously people focusing more on lead indicators. Again, it's a much more empowering place to focus on lead indicators rather than lag indicators, because so often at that left-hand side of the maturity model, what we're saying to people is just don't get hurt. No matter what you do, just don't get hurt, or, you know, make sure the incidents are down. And leaders tend to respond to incidents and issues that do arise in perhaps not the most helpful manner in those organizations. But at the front end, we're being more proactive. We're saying, well, if you invest your time, your effort, your energy, your focus into doing these proactive or positive behaviors or putting these positive measures into place, well, it's going to greatly increase your likelihood of getting home safe to the things that matter most to you.
Absolutely. And it does actually, like, you know, you're right, you have to invest in doing these behaviors. The great thing about culture is that it reinforces itself. So you might need to invest more at the start to begin this shift up the maturity curve. But as that trust and engagement builds, you'll find it's easier to maintain. You know, and that's what I think, you know, people sort of forget a little bit, that it might be hard initially to get that shift going, but through the consistency and over time, these discretionary efforts around safety actually help build and maintain and improve, and that shared responsibility for safety sits across everyone. That learning culture really underlies it all as well, and we build that stronger sense over time, and so we can get those long-lasting benefits.
And I think this model tells an interesting story, because if you think about the left-hand side being probably a predominantly blame culture or an externally locused culture. So this is where we have people not taking accountability and responsibility for their personal safety, waiting to be told, wanting to be caught out. We tend to see leaders policing and reinforcing through punishment. At the right-hand side, it's more of an accountability and responsibility space, where this is people see the why and the what's in it for me, and leaders are enlisting people in solving problems and creating trust. The challenge is with culture is that it's not a static concept. And if you're not consciously invested in your culture, then you're going to get whatever culture you want. And we've all probably been in organizations that are at the left-hand side there. So you walk into that culture that's a blame culture. You could be very much on the right-hand side of things personally, but what will tend to happen with individuals when they're put into that culture is they'll very quickly fall into what is the norm, or alternatively leave the business or be spat out and rejected by the business. So to Amy's point, by investing in that shift from public compliance to private compliance, that big step, if we can get critical mass and continue to invest in that critical mass of people, then it makes it much easier to enlist new starters or other people in that culture.
Yeah, exactly. You become an employer of choice, somewhere where people wish to stay, somewhere where people will speak positively to those new hires that are coming in. People start to embrace and adopt that culture that you've created.
So we've got a lot of people online who sort of at that private had seemingly made that step from the public compliance to private compliance, and even a couple of people who've matured past that from their perspective, which is great. Be curious to hear on the chat, what safety initiatives have they put into place that they've seen have really helped to create that shift? So we'll give it a couple of minutes for people to hopefully whack a couple of notes into the chat there. But what have they put into place, or what have you put on a place down the line which you've seen has really stuck and really helped to propel that culture forward? Just while people are having to think about that, Amy, so there's so much in culture, there's so many moving parts, and what I tend to find is that leaders can have difficulty knowing where to start, and as a result, we're trying things, and some stick and some don't. So how would you recommend organizations go about tackling really deliberately moving their culture towards that safety citizenship space?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, it comes with having an understanding of what's going on, and to really properly understand that, I think we can do some diagnostics or some assessments to identify what's working well from the perspective of your people, what's not working well, and remembering that culture is that shared perception. So even though you may have a small group of people at a certain level of the organization who thinks things are going really well or perhaps not going so well, you want to make sure you're picking up and assessing enough of your organization to look at that shared perception. And that's where I think is always a really useful starting point. But from there, I'd always encourage people to develop a sense of those, again, those small changes, working out where you want to start, but being consistent and really working at making sure that you don't sort of let these things that you've tried slide because you haven't seen that change. It's about maintaining and building all of those components. Up here on the slide at the moment, we've got our 2 safety diagnostic tools. So our first is our on-site safety evaluation and our safety climate survey. But we've actually got quite a few comments coming through already.
We do actually, yeah,
so
we've got some crackers, yeah.
I can explain those later because this will be really interesting to have a look through these.
Yeah, so we've got Christian who said for me, it's a critical piece about safety culture is about leadership. So specifically pointing at leadership support filtering down to the leading hand, so they have the space and security to facilitate the desired outcomes. It's often the leading hand's final touches to the task before work starts the tasks, where the rubber hits the road. So I guess what I'm hearing there is making sure that we're giving the support, the tools, the resources, and the capability to those leading hands within that organisation. What's your take on that, Amy?
Yeah, I think Christian's bang on. It's brilliant. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's often an under-invested space, isn't it? We spend a bunch of money on the top executives in the organisation, but the more it gets towards the front line, the less willing we are to invest that time and effort and energy. And often those people are coming off the tools. They feel like the sandwich in the middle. They're often having to lead the team that they may have been part of previously. So excellent, great. I couldn't agree more that focusing on that group, making sure they've got the psychological safety, the support and the tools and the resources to get the job done is critical. Unpacking a little bit further, regular site visits, absolutely. So one of the key things we see coming through in our cultural diagnostics time and time again is visibility on leadership on site, isn't it, Amy?
Yep. And again, it's about getting that regular site visits happening, but then what occurs while they're there, what occurs afterwards. If someone raises an issue during one of those site visits, nothing gets done about it. So the next time there's a site visit, what's going to happen when someone wants to raise an issue? So it's about following through those site safety visits. But you're absolutely right. If we're beginning from a point where they're not happening, we need to fix that first. Yeah. So getting that regularity going, and then working on, well, are they effective when they're happening?
100%. So what's the focus of those site visits? And again, this is often where you put the cherry on top. Are we hunting the good stuff as much as we're looking at challenging the things that aren't going to plan?
Absolutely.
The next one, which Sanjeev has mentioned, which can feed into this to a certain extent, is a big focus on a no-blame culture, which has increased reporting and engagement. Again, Amy, something that we really deliberately measure when we go into organisations, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's brilliant to see that Sanjeev's been able to put that focus on shifting, that blame approach, and has seen some nice improvements in reporting and engagement. Because I think, if we only measure reporting as an outcome, it's like, well, now it looks like we've got more incidents. Well, actually, no, we need to know what's going on so that we can do something about it. So we need to interpret that well.
Yeah, so we often unpack underreporting as one of the key focus areas, and we look at the drivers for underreporting. Is it that people feel like they get blamed if things go wrong? Is it that they feel like actions don't get closed out? Do they just fix it themselves? Is it difficult to report? So understanding those dynamics can be so important in focusing on the right thing. Katie's mentioned something here, which I think is really useful: involving people, talking to people, getting their participation in all things safety.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that.
Yeah. What else we got here? Consultation again. Yeah, it is so often that we make decisions for people on the floor without consulting with them, and as a result, time and time again, we hear about people not getting the right tools for the job, or procurement potentially making things difficult, and this can have a ramification where people start to get cynical about safety. There are decisions getting made for us. They don't understand the job to be done. It's all about saving money or saving time. So that consultation piece really useful. We've got some VR, so some really creative people. Trudy doing some VR stuff, which is kind of cool. Performing analysis of the results from safety conversations, critical control, verifications, and feedback. So leaders focusing on that. So Christopher's put that through. So really focusing on the quality of the conversations in field by the sounds of it. Excellent stuff. They're still coming. Safety team being more focused. Safety team being more worker focused and less production focused. Absolutely. Showing more care and the well-being for people. So thank you, Renee. Gordon, engaging workers on the coalface in safety, and randomly selecting individuals to get involved in incident investigations or reviewing procedures. Again, excellent consultation piece. Electronic safety management system, a continuous improvement program, a safety manager independent from senior management, walking and talking and monthly meetings. Gee, some really good stuff here. So a lot of people out there going out there and seeking to understand what's going on for people. We've got a health and safety 360, looking at just culture frameworks. Again, that focusing on the drivers and not blaming the person. Just some really great stuff. So Sarah, we might have to collate some of these for our follow-up email to make sure we're sharing these learnings across the broader group.
That's a very good idea.
Yeah. So just to dive in a little bit further, so we've spoken about collecting data and getting good quality data. Amy, where do we go from there?
Yeah, no worries. So from that point of running your safety diagnostic, and if it's okay, I'm going to jump back a step because I didn't actually explain both of those diagnostics before we got stuck into the comments. Our on-site safety evaluation is our qualitative approach. That's where we run a series of one-on-one interviews and focus groups, observations, and map through a thematic analysis process all the comments that we collect, all the observations we collect back to those dimensions on that maturity model. So as I mentioned, each of those dimensions is mapped out across those 5 maturity levels. And so we can provide really detailed feedback on what the shared beliefs, values, norms are across each of those dimensions through collecting that data on the ground and provide that detailed info on where each of those dimensions sit on the maturity model and overall. Our safety climate survey is that more quantitative approach. It's a survey that enables us to pick up on these components of the model along with a few additional components so that we can again get that fast snapshot of what that higher level culture is impacting, and therefore what we call climate as being that surface level of culture and how things are working at the moment in the organization. And again, we recommend that you try and capture at least kind of 60% of your organization from that survey, so you've got that true sense of this being a shared perception of what's going on. And again, provides you the opportunity to break apart your strengths and your areas for improvement across both of those tools. So once you have all that information, and it is quite a bit of information to begin to unpack, but again, it's about the detail and the richness of what's there being so much more useful to work out where to tailor and target your attention versus a more generic, very short survey that might just say, what do you think of safety culture at blah, and you just get an average result and it doesn't tell you what to do with any of it. And again, our sort of thematic analysis process really unpacks directly for your business what's going on. So it's not just heaps of comments coming back to you, it's actually being collated and analysed together. And so I think this is a really valuable process to begin with. But to answer your question about where to next, we'd be wanting to form a steering committee in our organisation to unpack that information, to identify where you might like to start, and creating that strategy going forward. Implementing the plan. As we know, if you don't actually have the motivation and drive to make the changes, then these results sit on a shelf, they don't go anywhere, they don't do anything. And again, we're not building that trust in the process of continuous improvement and people participating in the future, because nothing happened last time when we did one of these, let's say. So this is a 5-step process that we've recommended to really provide that support to improving and making changes from that information we collect in the diagnostic. Our last step there, keeping your finger on the pulse, we can actually run shorter versions of our survey with the pieces that you've targeted, let's say 6 months or 12 months after you've done the broader survey. So you can get a fast snapshot or pulse of what's going on in that area that you've chosen to improve as a steering committee. And so you can get immediate and more regular feedback rather than waiting to do a full assessment again. And then you may choose what's next on my list. We're going to work on that one, and we're just going to keep tracking that. And you'll get to a point where you may come back to the beginning and say, look, we've been working on a variety of things for quite a while. We've seen some improvements, but we want to assess again that broader culture. We'll go back to doing that broad OSE. It's been a little bit of time. So I think it's that opportunity to be always improving, collecting and keeping your finger on the pulse, and feeding that back into your steering committee to improve the planning.
It also gives the opportunity to communicate the positive change really well to the business. And again, this is a big gap that we see time and time again. Actually, organizations often do a lot of things really well, but because they're slow over time or because they're not like big bang kind of things, people don't necessarily always say, oh, I've been heard, I've been listened to, and you've done something about it. So it is also an opportunity to improve communication around the organisation and leaders' commitment to safety, and again, build that trust and connection between the two groups. We've had a couple of questions come through, Amy, and I just invite anyone else who has any questions for us to start to pop them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Just while people are taking a little bit of time to do that, we've got a couple of offers to make aware for people. So we have an online executive roundtable coming up in April. So it's a 90-minute interactive discussion on safety, focused on driving safety to protect brand and reduce risk. So we've had a number of people sign up to that already. If you'd like to get involved in that discussion, have a conversation with your peers, hear what different organizations and people are doing to address this really important topic, please click yes on the screen and we'll register you for some interest, and we'll have one of our team follow you up, probably Nibo, will check in with you and see whether that timing works for you. Again, if you can't make it and you click yes, then we can always catch you up on the next one as well. So it is a limited forum. I think we've got 4 or 5 spots left. So if you are interested, please click yes and we'll get in contact with you. Also, if you're interested in exploring the idea of safety culture and the psychological drivers of safety culture, and get some really practical tools to apply to your own safety and your organization's safety as well, we have another offer as well. So I'll just let that webinar, the roundtable one, close out. I'll give it another second. So in this offer, it's an opportunity for you to jump onto our online learning platform, and you can, again, dig deep. You can understand how attitudes, behaviors, and results tie into safety. You can look at that safety culture model, dig deeper into it, explore it a little bit further. And you can also look at a different way of, I guess, transferring skills and knowledge to your people. We use a flipped classroom approach in this instance, where we do the learning online, but then we have application sessions afterwards. So it's not having such a significant operational impact for the train, but we're still getting that interaction piece. We're still having the experience, and we're assured that we're getting great learning outcomes for people. So if you're interested in that, click yes, and we'll look to sign you up for that free trial. Okay, we've had a few questions roll in. We've got a really interesting one here from Campbell. Could be a can of worms, but we'll see. So Campbell said, "What do you think about the safety differently approach?" So Amy, what's your thoughts on the safety differently approach?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it actually overlaps a little bit with another question we've got from Louise asking about safety too. So I think Sentis has always worked to be across the literature in that safety space and draws from a variety of models, which I think gives the benefit of being eclectic. You're not just adopting a single approach. So safety differently certainly offers a few interesting ideas, or particularly around trust and building that kind of shared sort of connection or commitment to safety. Safety 2 offers some really good things around providing that focus on what's working well and how we can learn from that, and how we can really focus on that. And so I think for us, it's about taking that eclectic approach. I don't think that safety differently on its own provides enough guidance on how to really start to improve safety culture. And I mean, I know that there's some debate in the literature out there on culture generally. I think there's enough, for me, evidence and support for safety culture being influential enough in organizations and worth investing. And the reality is if we're pulling levers in an organization and improving things with the aim of improving our culture, regardless of whether or not you think culture exists, I would argue that those levers you're pulling, those improvements you're making, the efforts you're doing are worthwhile. And what we want to see is those outcomes. And so we believe the reason those outcomes get there is because we're improving the culture. You can make a whole bunch of arguments about whether or not culture exists, but we see the outcomes. And that's what I think matters. So without getting too, as you said, opening that can of worms, do you have anything extra to add on that?
Oh, look, again, you can pull a lot of really useful ideas from within the safety literature, and actually outside the safety literature, there's some really great stuff that needs to get pulled in, but it needs to be considered, it needs to be deliberate, it needs to be based on addressing the challenges or opportunities that you have within your organization, which is why getting the data enables us to do that.
Yeah.
I've got one here from Craig. Do you have any comments on safety considerations arising from the Aged Care Royal Commission?
Oh, interesting question. I think you could ask the same question about what's been in the media a lot lately around the culture in Parliament House as well. My initial comment would say, absolutely, there's a need for unpacking the culture that's existing there, that broader organizational culture, along with that safety culture that's driving these behaviors. I think by unpacking that, we'd be able to identify the best ways to make change and improve that. And I think it's a really valuable and worthwhile area to be addressing and improving things.
Yep. Great. Any other questions that people may have? I'm just scanning through here now. There's a lot of comments here, but not too many other questions, I don't think. Give people another second or so if they'd like to ask any other questions.
Yeah,
Am I missing anything there, Sarah?
No, they seem to be more comments, I think.
Great.
Yep. Goy's got a good comment about ensuring that frontline leaders while they receive a lot of training, it can also be important for middle management to understand the training they're receiving, so there isn't that disconnect in beliefs and values. So there is that shared understanding of the way things are done. And there was another comment about, getting people out there to experience, the work, to put themselves in the shoes of other people. So I think they're great comments as well.
Well, they are, and actually some of the most recent culture data we've been getting through has shown an interesting phenomena where the frontline leaders and teams seem to be bonding together often, and then there's a gap towards management or senior management. So those types of deliberate activities which bring the business together and align objectives and align outcomes, really useful to address those.
Absolutely.
Great.
There's one more question. Well, there's a couple actually. From Hoven asked, "What are your thoughts on COVID and how it affected work culture?"
Yeah, good one. COVID's had such a huge impact on work culture, hasn't it? There's been some interesting research actually recently that a toxic work culture that may have existed when you were in person is actually still influencing people when they're working from home, which I think is a really interesting finding. And I think, we're getting used to this sort of more virtual ways of working, and we can easily make the assumption that bullying or more toxic or negative behaviors may not have the same impact on people now that they have that distance from the office. But we're finding that it does. And what people also lose is that social support, social connections. So I think we'll see some work cultures that really make an effort to ensure, if they may have sat more up in that safety citizenship end of their culture, to maintain that, to connect in with people, to care for each other, to look out for each other while people are working from home. And then we'll see other places where people can feel a bit more forgotten about, where let's just get the job done. We're not so worried, provided you're getting the job done, we don't really mind. So I think COVID has fundamentally changed the way that we work, and the way that our culture will adapt to that and adjust will be really interesting and something that we should be mindful of.
Great. Well, two more quick ones. Well, they may or may not be quick. We've got one from Gary here. Culture, simple, complex, or just complicated?
Depends on your mood for the day, doesn't it, Gary? Yep. I think if we're measuring it well, we can make it simple.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I think it's really important. You know, if we can go out there and really begin to unpack what it means specifically for an organization, that's where we can start to make it simple. But if we sit in the more nebulous space, yeah, we can make it really complicated.
Great. And then the last one, what's your best approach to setting up a committee to build the strategy plan?
Right. Do you want to answer that one, Anne?
Oh, yeah, easy. So again, sitting down and deliberately thinking about who are the key stakeholders across an organization and ensuring that it's not the HR or safety department that are the predominant people involved. So really deliberately sitting down, looking at, well, who's got the authority and the power to make things happen, who has a vested interest in getting this right, and ensuring that you're thinking strategically about who's involved in that committee to get those particular outcomes. So again, it often gets stuck with the safety team and they're trying to push things across the organization, or HR team. We really do need operational leaders involved if we're going to get the result we're looking for. Well, it looks like I think we've run out of time and we've run out of questions, Amy.
Yep, that's been wonderful. Really great chat comments as well.
Look, thank you for having us, Sarah. It's been a great group to have on the call, and hopefully see some of them come along next time as well.
Yeah, it has been great. It was really good to get that interaction from the attendees as well. That's really great. So we're going to post some of those chat comments on the landing page for the webinar and podcast later today. So you'll be able to see those. And I'd like to really thank you, Anthony and Amy, for joining us. The feedback has been great as well, as always. So thank you for that. I am just going to, I've posted a link in the chat for the webinars that are coming up. Next week on the 25th of March, we've got a webinar on conversational intelligence. That's going to be presented by Deborah Burlington, who's the Director of Enhanced Solutions. So please join us for that one. And also on the, I think on the April the 1st, a different type of webinar, but the Australian Institute of Health and Safety are just going to give an overview on the OHS certification that they offer. So if you want to learn more about that, join that webinar. And also on April 8th, what happens to workers when it's hot. So it's apparently there's a growing body of evidence that demonstrates that workers are more prone to injury during hot weather. So that'll be April the 8th. Thank you very much, Anthony and Amy. As I've said earlier, we'll get the podcast and the recording, the video recording out by email later today, and also some PDFs that Anthony has mentioned earlier with some resources from Sentis. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.